Hello, everyone. From a last bit of the summer Franschhoek in the Western Cape in South Africa. I know that we have an audience from all over the world this evening, and we want to welcome you to tonight's expose of Africa. If you're joining, you'll notice that there's a chat functionality on the live stream. Please say hello, tell us where you are from. We love to engage our community and get a feel for where people are dialing from around this world. Joining me tonight, right here, right now, is the CEO and co-founder of Simple.Capital, and my friend Tim Willis. Tim, good evening. And just briefly, I think you might be in Johannesburg.
Correct. I'm in Johannesburg at the moment, so great to be with you.
Fantastic. Tim, welcome. Thank you very much for taking time out to join us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, as the last few people are logging in and we just allow for the population of tonight's audience base, we want to extend an invitation. We want to ask you to hover your camera of your smartphone or the device that you're on over the QR code that's on screen now. This will allow for a two-way conversation. We are not going to bombard you with spam afterwards. This is really a community engagement tool to make sure that you get to pose questions and participate in tonight's conversation, such that it is not a lecture, but rather a fireside chat that we just happen to do digitally. So again, welcome. And Tim, I believe a couple of thoughts from your side are due as we go through why we're having tonight's webinar. What are people here to see?
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think, Willem, we have like a super exciting panel of many guests. This is definitely the most people we've ever had on in a webinar. So we've got a great discussion from investors, Jim, Nicole, and Aaron, who will all be giving us some investor insight. We've got Obins and Dalumuzi here, who will be giving us founder insights, and some of the Simple.Capital team members as well. Recently joined by Tehran, based in New York, as our venture partner based out of the US. So a ton of folks who have a whole lot of expertise and will be able to give us a lot of insight into this topic of why invest in Africa. I think there are a couple more slides just that I can go through as we set up the reason for tonight's webinar. And I think the first reason is that we're seeing, a significant number of global investors start to enter the African tech space. And this has been a huge movement over the last couple of years. So you're seeing the likes of Tiger Global, SoftBank, and Andreessen Horowitz. These are guys who we traditionally only saw investing in the US and Europe and maybe in the sophisticated Asian markets. And they're now starting to see that there's huge opportunity in Africa. And some of these African companies are starting to export their technology across the world, which I think is also super exciting. And we're starting to see, Africa build some world-class tech that is being used in all corners of the globe. So I think that's a very exciting part of the thesis of why invest in Africa. And to that point, Willem, I mean, here you can see that, in 2021, it just went off the charts what happened in terms of capital flowing into Africa. So 2019, you saw over $2 billion come into Africa, slightly down to $1.5 billion in 2020. But in 2021, it was the year of the African continent, with over $5.2 billion of venture capital invested across 640 companies on the continent. And I think this shows that this is about to be the hotbed of opportunity. And I think, probably 5-10 years ago, folks were looking at Latin America and some parts of Southeast Asia, probably saying, hey, this is the next opportunity or the next frontier. And I think what this graph suggests to us is that probably Africa is the next frontier. We're seeing leading global investors come into this market. We're seeing significant capital flows. And I really think there's a case for investing in Africa.
Tim, to that point, we've got American investors and people that have made investments into Africa on tonight's production. And so important perhaps to point out that this is not Willem and Tim's view of Africa. We're actually going to bring an expose of experts together to talk about why that orange line is there and what they're seeing and how they are viewing this opportunity set.
Exactly. And I think that yeah, and I mean, I think that's why we wanted to just set the scene with these graphs to say and tables to say, you know, this is not our view that this is happening in Africa. This is a global view, and this is what we're seeing. Global investors, the top global investors in the world, deploy billions of dollars into this market.
Yeah,
I think we had one last.
Also, yeah. Oh, no, sorry, I was just going to say that has also led to some pretty exciting opportunities that have come about, right? So the capital is not just taking a punt, it's actually yielding some results. And we do have some African unicorns that have actually come out of this bout of capital flow that's come into our fray here. And I'm dead sure we've got a slide on that coming up in a sec. There we go. Maybe worthwhile taking an overview.
Yeah, and this is an exciting slide. I mean, what we're seeing is that now a continent that really had very few unicorns a couple of years ago is now sitting with multiple tech unicorns, companies valued at over $1 billion. And I mean, a company like Wave was only founded a couple of years ago and has suddenly, you know, really taken West Africa by storm. And you're seeing, I suppose, some of the companies that we might know, like Flutterwave, etc., in the fintech space. Also, I mean, B2B software with Andela, also out of West Africa. So super, super exciting ecosystem, you know, that is developing. And the more of these success stories that happen, the more exciting the African market will become for investors.
Now, Tim, I want to switch gears and get the investors in the room. So I'm going to ask you to grab a glass of water and perhaps just take a breath. I know you've had a hectic day. While the production team just brings some of our panelists for phase one of this conversation into the room. Tim, thanks very much. We're going to see you in a little bit. And I would like to welcome, as they're starting to appear here, our panelists. I'm going to go in the order that they are on screen. Nicole, Jim, Aaron, and Theron. And I'll ask you just really quickly in that order to give us 5 seconds of who you are and where you are, please. Nicole, let's start with you.
Great, thanks, Willem. I'm Nicole. I'm in Cape Town, representing Founders Factory Africa, an early stage venture builder and investor with a Pan-African mandate.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. Jim.
Jim Chu in San Francisco, and we invest across Africa, from Southern Africa to Northern Africa.
Welcome, Jim, all the way from San Francisco, one of my favorite parts of the world. Aaron, welcome to you also. Where are you based tonight?
Thanks, Willem. I'm in New York right now, but spend a ton of time in Nairobi. I'm with the Catalyst Fund. We invest in fintech across LATAM, Africa, as well as Asia.
Wonderful. Nice to have you. And Theron, nice to see you again. You're a familiar face to the simple.Capital investment team, but for the people that haven't met you, just really quickly, who you are and where you're from.
Thanks, Willem. Really happy to be here. I'm out of New York, previously San Francisco for about a decade, and been an investor, a founder, a banker, and building a fintech in the finance space now.
Welcome, Theron. We'd like to think of you as a reformed banker now in the venturing space. Very nice to have you this evening as well. Nicole, I'm going to kick off with you. I believe that you've just come back from Nairobi, where you've seen some interesting stuff over the last week. Just as a seeder for the conversation, perhaps let's just kick off there. What did you see? What were you doing there?
Sure, and I was fortunate to see some of the members on the panel in Nairobi as well. So it was for primarily the Africa Tech Summit, which is one of the first tech startup investor events post-COVID, and so really well attended from investors focusing on the African startup ecosystem. And what was most striking to me is just the energy and excitement about the African startup landscape at the very early stages. And I think a combination of the trends that you highlighted in those slides, especially given the increase in particularly international funding coming in, some of the success stories that we're starting to see in the continent is building investor confidence that is leading investors locally, from venture capitalist angels to even some investment banks, investing at much earlier stages on friendlier founder terms. And so I think that for me was the overwhelming observation, was really that excitement. And so, I think it'd be interesting maybe to hear the thoughts on why we think that's playing out in that way, because I'm sure everyone here has a different perspective from the conversations they're having.
Sure. And in fact, that's a hell of a nice segue to what I'd planned to ask Jim next, which is you're in San Francisco. You have Silicon Valley within 30 minutes drive. Well, let's say it's a good traffic day. So on average, 40 minutes drive. What are you doing in Africa? What is the belief and why?
Well, I think Africa is the next frontier when it comes to venture investing and innovation. All the reasons that you guys talked about, the demographic boom, but also things have changed in the last few years, especially with cloud computing. And the pandemic has really accelerated this transition to a leveling playing field for entrepreneurs from around the world to be able to compete globally. A South African, a Cape Town startup can offer its services via the cloud to pretty much anyone in the world. Now, of course, there is the hurdle of understanding the customers and being close to the customers. But from a technical perspective, from a practical perspective, you can operate in AWS in South Africa and serve the world. So that's really changed things. And, you know, at the end of the day, as an investor, I like to swim upstream. I like to go where people aren't going. And at the end of the day, there's an arbitrage opportunity. There's incredibly talented entrepreneurs and companies that have the potential to go global. But because of the investment ecosystem in Africa is really not quite as mature as, let's say, the US, there's room to help African companies go global. And so that's really our investment thesis. How do we identify the most promising companies in Africa and help them go global with a mix of different types of investment instruments to help them do that, all the way from pre-seed to IPO?
Jim, I'm going to come back to you in a little bit on the question of how you help. I have this view that great ideas are infinite, capital is abundant, and talent to execute with that capital on that idea is what is the scarcity. And so with capital in abundance, I'd really like to come back and ask around the other things other than money, which constitute that help that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But perhaps before we get there, I want to just quickly move to Aaron and say, Aaron, these companies, the arbitrage opportunities, the global servability out of Africa is great, but how do you find companies inside of Africa? How do you find these opportunities to make your swimming upstream worthwhile? Because I saw you nodding your head when Jim was saying swim upstream.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jim and I share a passion for going early and going where other people don't, at least not yet, and proving the case. I think right now you're almost beginning to see a second wave of founders, right? So you've got that first layer of Flutterwave, Paystack, Interswitch, like all of them have sort of like built a large cadre of individuals who have seen what it takes to build a company from pre-seed all the way to a $3 billion valuation, right? And so I think you're beginning to see sort of like individuals who have seen that beginning to branch off and build their own companies, very often in close collaboration with these giants that they've sort of helped build. And I find that really, really interesting, right? I think I personally keep a little black book of founders who are not yet founders who I would love to back one day. So I think that's really important. I also think there's a lot of diaspora as well, based in San Francisco, based in New York, who have seen the opportunity back home to build something truly meaningful, right? And not meaningful in the pure impact sense of like, I want to give back and I want to do charity. It really is sort of, they see an opportunity to build infrastructure from the ground up where those opportunities don't really exist in the US and in the UK, right? Where you're sort of more a very niche player in a sort of already established supply chain. So I think diaspora is also a very, very huge sort of talent coming through. And finally, I do want to say that with the huge influx of funding coming through, you're also seeing a lot of senior executives in banks and telcos and FMCG suddenly see, actually, I don't have to take a 50%, 20% pay cut in order to go work at a startup, right? So you're also seeing like that level of talent coming through too. So yeah, that's probably what I say to that. Just quickly on your stats as well, I also just want to say that I really feel that we're only just getting started in Africa. Like we talk about, 5-6 billion of funding coming through. Southeast Asia raised 6 billion in funding in Q1 2021, right? And I think you definitely see that sort of like, where will it land, right? I have a prediction that in 2022 we'll cross the $10 billion mark easy. So the point I want to emphasize here is like, while the 5 to 6 billion mark is worthwhile to celebrate, and we all should, and everyone in this room played a big part in making that happen, we really are only just getting started here.
Well, that certainly holds great promise for the prospect. I've been hearing a lot of Africa is the next frontier, Africa is the next growth market. I often wonder, is that not just consulting speak to get projects funded? But what I'm picking up is an overwhelming groundswell in sentiment. And Theron, to bring you in here, what's the US sentiment as sort of the capital mecca of the world around Africa? And how is that changing? Do you see it shifting?
Yeah, I will do my best for answering. I'm not going to be able to speak for everybody in North America here, but I do. I mean, some of the things that stand out to me anyway is it's a young country, right? The amount of populace that is younger is well over 50%. So you have a lot of people with interesting ideas that need a place to go. They need something to build out this software and this technology. As you mentioned by Jim earlier, was cloud computing that's so much easier. I also think that it might even be easier for those companies to expand globally than it would be for companies in different ecosystems, because it's just, there's so much draw out back, let's say, into North America. And when we started talking, it was there's so much uncertainty. There's an inability to understand what's going on with the deal flow. There's capital there, but I don't know those investors, so there's a lot of interest for both, I think, people globally, but in North America, to say what is going on there and how do I get involved? Is it difficult? Is it easy? And it's almost a catalyst at this point, I would say.
I get that often. When we talk about America, I know there's 50 states, but it's quite easy because it's largely homogenous and at the very least a single jurisdiction. Whereas, Nicole, I think in Africa there's 54 countries, depending on what Sudan does on any given day. And all those pockets have got different jurisdictional issues, currency issues. Some of them have got like cross-border money remittance issues. Out of all of this, is it worth the first world having a look at Africa? And like, what are these macro trends that you see that give you the conviction of being a pro-Africa panelist on a night like tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those challenges present the real opportunity in Africa. And if you're able to take a lens of what we would call those institutional voids, the lack of hard and soft infrastructure, some of the challenges that buyers face when trying to find sellers, and all the inefficiencies in different markets, that's really where innovators can capture a significant opportunity through building that infrastructure in countries. And if you look at the unicorns that have emerged in Africa, if you look at the companies that are raising hundreds of $millions, they tend to have a couple of things in common. They're solving for access, not consumption. They're building solutions that help people make money, and really opening up new wealth creation opportunities for the people they serve, be those individuals or be those businesses in the case of your Flutterwaves, your OPAYs, and so on. They're overcoming these institutional voids through strategic partnerships, really using that adversity and infrastructure gap as a way to create competitive advantage. And I think we're going to see more of that. They're building infrastructure that can be used by others in the ecosystem. And that was a big component in justifying Wave's valuation in their recent round, was really, unlike some other players playing in the mobile money and remittances space, they're really building repeatable infrastructure that can be leveraged by others. And they're also really kind of proving that replicability early on, either through a kind of geographic application or through new kind of sectoral and product replications in the cases of OPAY and Fowry. So really, I think the best startups in Africa are taking that exact problem statement and saying, what are some of the enabling macroeconomic changes, like rising smartphone and digital penetration, like some of the enabling regulatory changes that we're seeing, and really using that as a way to build scalable solutions that are creating access to a whole new set of economic actors that haven't been able to previously engage in those economies.
Nicole, then the question that comes to mind as you're speaking is the inherent limitation on that scalability then Africa? Or do you see consolidation perhaps as some of the liquidity where first world countries that don't have these infrastructure problems to solve, they've already solved them, perhaps do acquisition, or how does that play out?
Consolidation might be one option. I think in some instances, because those haven't been issues in other countries, there are solutions that are solving those challenges much more efficiently because of the new technologies available today. And so in some cases, there might be solutions to problems or solutions that better service customers who are in some ways excluded, even within markets that we tend to talk about as developed, who are currently underserved today. Equally, I think it's a bit intellectually lazy to say that African startups will always scale into another African market because that's where there's direct applicability. We're seeing some startups scale from African countries into markets like Singapore, like Pakistan, like Latin American markets. And so there are definitely customers even within those countries which face similar challenges to the consumers and merchants that are typically targeted by African startups.
Oh,
Right.
we lose Will.
I do have a little bit of
silent. I'm not
connectivity
sure if
issue.
it's a good thing or a bad
It
thing.
can be heard by the rest of the panelists. Oops.
We can hear you. We
Looks
can
like
hear
we're
you now.
back. Everyone's good.
You're back, Will.
I got the gist of that, Nicole, and luckily I've got Otter.ai running, so I can see the transcript, so I could keep up with reading. Jim, if I just switch some gears really quickly, the help that we were talking about earlier, capital being abundant, now starting to become abundant in Africa, what kind of support services do you see typically African companies needing and wanting that lends them to perhaps partner with you as opposed to someone else?
This is a question for Nicole, right? Or for who is the question for?
It's for you, Jim. Sorry.
It's for me. Okay, yeah. So what kind of support? Yeah, I mean, we at Untapped, we try to be the bridge between understanding the local environment, the founders, and international capital. You know, I think it's easy for international investors to just muscle memory their way into new markets. Oh, this is the way we did it in the US, so this is the right way to do it here, right? And I think oftentimes that's the easiest way to get burned. So what we really try to focus on is helping. It's a little bit of a hate to use the word education, but there's a bit of a information component to what we do, in the sense of helping international investors understand how the South African market is different from the US market, how the South African market is different from the Egyptian market, and really help them understand where the opportunities are. And so I think that is one of the best ways to support African entrepreneurs, because oftentimes an African entrepreneur spends 80% of the time speaking to investors, explaining their context. And so we can actually help those entrepreneurs set the stage with investors and say, this is the way things are. Here are the opportunities. This is why certain companies are doing this. That actually helps the African entrepreneurs pitch why they're special, why they can execute. So I think a big part of what we do is to really be that educational bridge, that informative bridge, to ensure that people coming in are investing the right way and with the right background. I know we lost Willem, but
yeah. I think also wanted to maybe double tap on what Nicole just mentioned there around sort of that unifying infrastructure that's being built. I think that is really such a big difference between, you know, investing in Africa 2-3 years ago versus now, right? I think while African startups still have to face a lot of regulatory hurdles and sort of in-market hurdles in each one of these markets, you now only have one pay stack, one stitch, one pipe to plug into, and already get access to a range of markets, right? So you've sort of seen people like Jim who've sort of gone in first and laid some of the groundwork to make the next sort of batch of entrepreneurs' lives a little bit easier to scale into these markets. And I think to Nicole's second point, like I've always been super bullish about the ability for African startups to build their products and sell their products in the rest of the world. I know at Nest we actually got a couple of African startups to get pretty significant contracts with banks in Hong Kong and Vietnam, so that's been proven out. And if you look at the later stage ones right now, right, like Andela and Flutterwave, they all are repositioned as global companies that happen to have their roots and base in Africa, and using that sort of learning and talent base that they have to then scale into the rest of the world. I'm very excited at the century of the Africa that we see exporting technology to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
I think
I would just second Aaron and Nicole. I think that's the most interesting investment thesis that we haven't really seen play out yet. I mean, there's a lot of excitement around fintech. I think a lot of those companies are very internally focused, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think there is a very interesting opportunity for African entrepreneurs to really export their services, export their technologies. And really, I think the arbitrage opportunity, if you will, is taking those African technologies to the global markets. Right? Because valued as an African company, you're going to get one thing. Value the same technology, the same talent, the same everything on global capital markets is valued at another. And it makes sense because you're accessing bigger markets. But I think that's where the interesting piece is. And going back to William's question, I think our job as investors, as value-add investors, is to help those companies make that bridge. The investment models, the connections, the if you will, completeness of the investment life cycle, all of those things are the things that we can provide to local entrepreneurs so they can get from pre-seed to IPO.
I have a question for the three of you, if I could, and just a scenario. If I come in and say, okay, I found a company, or well, several questions. One is, do you see in general economics are better for the investor? You know, valuations, things like that. Let me roll these together and maybe you can answer them together. And if I was to say, okay, I found a potential portfolio company, this could be interesting to get to point B, are the hurdles so high? Would I be calling you right away, Jim, and saying, how to help me, please? Can you guys maybe talk to that a little bit?
So I think the economics are interesting from several different perspectives. I think, well, this is more of a push than a pull, but I think in the US right now, you have a lot of very highly valued companies. Now, whether they're worth that or not, I think really can only be addressed from a big market perspective, right? If you're Andreessen Horowitz and have the money to pay $80 million post-money valuation because you think that company is going to go to $2 billion, that's a pretty limited playing field, and it leaves a lot of people out. In Africa, you can get companies that have that similar potential, but you're able to come in at an earlier stage with a much better valuation and get access to, basically much better deals than I can without being Andreessen Horowitz in the US. So I think that is already very helpful. And I think the piece that is also very useful from an investor standpoint is that if you play the right role within the life cycle, you can add a lot of value because there's so many holes in the life cycle for companies in Africa, right? Whether lack of pre-seed funding or lack of seed funding or lack of Series A funding, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you're able to fill in some of those potholes in a way that smooths out the growth for some of these companies, I think you can really see some upside in each of the valuation jumps as you move from one stage to another. I don't know if I
fully
answered your question
agree.
there or addressed your comment.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe Nicole or Aaron can help out with.
I think, Darren, I think the only thing I would add there is I would have a very different response 1 year ago versus now, right? Like I think a year ago you saw much more, I guess, reasonable valuations across the board. But, you know, as Jim mentioned, there's a bit of a push factor here where a lot of US capital are seeking opportunities in Africa right now. And that's sort of seen valuations like pump up a little bit where fundamentals haven't actually really changed, right? So that's a little bit like of a worrying trend. I think the right founders are still asking the questions of, you know, what is the price to bring Jim on the cap table, to bring Nicole on the cap table, and are being sort of like reasonable with that. But I do see a lot of like short-term capital raises that are prioritizing high prices, raising a lot, which I worry might sort of damage them in the sort of long run. But there's still a lot of like great prices to be had right now.
And with regard to, sorry, Willem, I don't want to take over the talk. It's very, very excited and interesting. You know, if I was to come in and say, hey, I do safe notes and I just want to go this way, is that easy to do? Like, what are the vehicles that one would use to
I think sort of like angel all the way to seed, you're pretty safe. But I think seed up, you're probably seeing like more price rounds at that point.
Yeah, I think another interesting trend we're seeing is more excitement around venture debt as an instrument at later stages of startup growth, particularly because of some of the challenges that have been alluded to on this call around the CapEx required to overcome some of the scaling and infrastructure investments required by a lot of startups. Also funding balance sheets, of course, where you've got a lending component, which is often a part of a lot of the models that we're seeing at scale. So that instrument as well is becoming increasingly popular, I would say, among investors at the later stages.
Thank you.
Perhaps a vehicle-related question. And Theron, thank you so much for anchoring in while the construction truck outside clipped my fiber connection. Some of the connectivity issues that we have now in Africa. To the vehicle question, do you, as a group, perhaps just broadly commenting, see some engineering happening to provide non-African investors with safety, in at least perception, that their money is going to be looked after by virtue of parking perhaps the raise offshore and then deploying into the company, such as to provide some form of psychological safety to people who look at Africa and say, I don't know what's going on there. I hear there's a lot of growth, but I don't know how to get in. And faced with a choice, I might veer to a safer choice. Vehicle-wise, what are you seeing as trends?
Can I just jump in there, because I have strong feelings about this. It isn't just a perception of safety. It's a practical benefit to be domiciled offshore, right? You know, when you are again, going back to a hypothetical example of a cloud-based service serving customers around the world, and you're based in Cape Town, you know, forget the regulatory environment in South Africa for a second. Simply being a domicile as an American company helps you already, because it gives you access to American investors that you otherwise would not. And just purely from a administrative and even a tax perspective, it's hugely beneficial. As an American investor investing in an American C Corp, I have great tax advantages, 100% capital gains tax-free, right? And if I invest in a Dutch company or a UK company, I don't have those benefits. And so I see a lot of, almost every company that I come across these days actually is either an American C Corp, a Delaware C Corp. And starting one is really easy. There's services where you can just go online and get a bank account and the EIN or a tax ID in a few days for less than $500, right? So that compared to trying to set up an entity in the UK or in Holland or, God forbid, in South Africa, it's a lot easier. And from an investor's standpoint, makes it much easier for me to understand the regulations, but also take advantage of those tax benefits.
Yeah, I think there's a practical conversation and there's a philosophical conversation. And I would agree with Jim very much. Even from the founder side, there is immense benefit in registering in those geographies beyond the investor access. As a founder, you get tax benefits. As a founder, you get better IP protection. As a founder, you get R&D credits that just aren't available if you register as an African entity. I think it's a strong call to action to African governments to wake the hell up and start to improve the environment so that you don't have that kind of wealth outflow from the continent. But certainly on a practical level, we would have to recommend at the moment for our startups to register somewhere like Delaware. It doesn't make sense to be registered locally.
Yeah, I want to stick to the operational side, not the philosophical side, because that's like a whole one-day conference. But on the practical side, I will say that for almost all the companies that we invest in, we make it a precondition that they actually then flip into Delaware if they're not already there, and that's just because we rely so heavily on sort of follow-on capital from the US to come through that we just need that to happen, right? It's not really a question of if, but it's just when.
Yes.
That's a much more blunt way of saying I pretty much will only do American C Corp investments. Well,
Jim, you're cutting to the chase of what I wanted to ask, but struggled to find a polite way of doing so. So I'm glad you did that. All right, we have got a whole series of founders that we want to bring into the next section. So I'll ask for closing comments around your Africa perspectives and perhaps something that you believe is of value to potential investors that are on this call listening to Africa and why Africa. And can I ask that we sort of do it in the same direction as we had kicked off this conversation? So I'll start with Nicole. Sorry to put you on the spot, but perhaps just some closing comments on Africa and your sentiment or value set around that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk at the moment about, is there a bubble? Are these valuation, inflation something to be concerned about? I think, look, there might be some correction, but it's never going to go back to where it started. And if you track how ecosystems have typically developed, it tends to be that when there is a critical mass of scaled startups that are reached, it sets the foundation for exponential growth in startup ecosystem growth and success. So look at India, look at China, look at Latin America. Very few unicorns, very few mega deals, and then suddenly all at once. And that's kind of the multiplier effect that Aaron alluded to with you've got a second foundation and generation of founders. There is more cultural acceptance of startups as a viable model. ESOPs and equity start to mean something. Corporate partners have confidence you'll be around in a few years. Investors start to take you seriously. So I'm very bullish that this momentum is going to continue. And I would put my hand up to second Aaron's bet around $10 billion this year. I think, there's excitement around infrastructure plays, specifically in financial service, and tokenization and DeFi is a big part of that. I think we're starting to see interest beyond the big four markets into markets like Francophone Africa, where the lack of dominant players presents an interesting opportunity. So I think we're also going to see a slightly more diversified set of markets and opportunities that come through this year, but likely fintech still playing the biggest role because of where we are in kind of the ecosystem's maturity.
Fantastic, Nicole. Thank you. And from your lips to government's ears as to waking up and making environments within which all of this can come to fruition. Jim, switching to you on the same closing comments.
Yeah, I think going back to my original comment about swimming upstream or going where the crowd isn't going, I think there is so much untapped opportunity in Africa. And I think, there's a lot of excitement around fintech, Nigerian fintech everywhere. Fintech's great. I love it. We're a fintech company. So, there's nothing knocking fintech. But I think where the real upside opportunities are is in some of these other sectors, in these other areas, and also in other investment models, right? The 2%, 20% venture model isn't the only way to invest. Yes. And so we should be looking at these alternative models because Africa is different. It is more fragmented than a China or a US. There are other opportunities to go after. And so I think the creative investors, and usually creativity and investors don't go in the same sentence, but the creative investors will be the ones who win on this continent, because I think there are very interesting opportunities that simply aren't being tapped into today because the investment models aren't there.
All right, well, here's to the future of pioneers that find those ways for us and open up channels to enable that capital flow, both in as well as return to investors. Thank you for that. Aaron, from your side?
Yeah, I think Nicole and Jim have really said it all. I think only to add is, from a timing perspective, investors in the room, you're probably another 2 years away from being too late, right? Like right now, we've got the right talent base, we've got the right digital infrastructure in place, phone adoption is like through the roof. I think you would be remiss for, looking back 3 years later and saying, I missed out on the next China or the next India. So I highly urge you to start looking at those opportunities now. You've got a range of vehicles to go in with as well, right? Like Jim works a lot with venture debt and debt instruments. I work a lot with funds where you can invest in as well. Obviously, Simple, you can work with direct investments as well. So all these opportunities are all there. Talent is in abundance and hungry and really wants to build the next for their continent. So I can't think of a better time. So don't be looking sort of 3 years back and wondering why you missed out on Africa after having tuned into this. And the final thing that I might leave you with is sort of one of my early investor mentors once said to me, always look for industries and companies where they're still using fax machines and are still somehow making a really good profit, and focus on investing in that, because even a slight uptick can really generate a lot of value. There are a lot of fax machines and a lot of industries in Africa. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to enhance that and capture value. So I'll leave on that.
Fantastic. Theron, I'm going to come back to you because you're staying with us for the rest of the night. And then I want to, at this point, just juncture and say, Nicole, Jim, and Aaron, thank you very much for sharing your time with us this evening and for sharing some perspective on a continent that we certainly love and believe in great opportunity in. Wonderful to balance our beliefs with your practical, on-the-ground perspectives. We thank you for joining us this evening as friends of Simple Capital. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. And hopefully next time we can do this in French instead.
Yes, thanks, Willem.
Yeah, and I'd love to have that philosophical conversation as well. So definitely we'll have a continuation of this in a different form. To the production team, can I ask that we perhaps just quickly bring up our QR code again? And this is to enable participants in the audience tonight to make this a two-way conversation. This is an enablement to perhaps pose questions to founders in real time. I've got a WhatsApp screen open on my right-hand side. And so throughout the course, if interesting questions come up, we'll certainly pose them to the panelists. Tim, you are staying with me, and we are now going to be joined by two prospective founders from Africa, Obins and Dalumuzi. And gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you as friends of Simple Capital to tonight's expose of Africa. Let's start with Obins. Just really quickly, who are you? Where are you from, and where are you tonight? And then I'll move across to Dalumuzi as well.
You're on mute, Obins.
Sorry. Hi, this is Obins Choudhary, CEO and co-founder of Carscan.ai. I'm from India. I have done this startup in automotive data marketplace space, and we have built this capability in South Africa. I'm talking from Joburg, and we are already in 9 countries operating and expanding continuously. We'll talk more as we go.
Fantastic. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. We know for founders, for both of you gentlemen, that taking time away from your business is precious time, and so we're highly appreciative that you would come here and share perspective with us. Dalumuzi, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Where are you? What is the nature of your business? And then we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty tonight.
Great. Thank you so much, Willem. So I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm in Johannesburg at the moment, and very excited to be here. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us. Obins, I'm going to start with you. And gentlemen, please feel free to answer parts of relevant questions in conversational format. This is certainly not just an interview. We're hoping to share perspective with a larger audience. But to kick that off, perhaps just, Obins, give us a quick professional career backstory. And from just interesting from perspective of a gentleman that was born in India to find yourself in Johannesburg, a long way from home. What's the story?
Yep. All the hardship that I had to grow up in India and then to travel for IT services opportunity in South Africa led me to lead one of the largest banks in the world for leading their research and development and building the data businesses across the world, which also gave me the exposure to build the capabilities which were quite unique and showing what is actually possible in Africa and starting from Africa, getting that exposure of the developing world in South Africa and also those underdeveloped countries where you can test your idea and then really get it right with your product market fit before trying too many things too early or getting too exposed in to big markets. And that's where it actually the market held your hand to, like it holds your hand to give you the confidence, the time that you need to build your confidence. So at times before you build your product, you get into the competition and you get into you become too nervous, thinking about too many other things than what you actually should be doing. But I think Africa gave me that opportunity to focus on building a very niche product for the world from Africa, focusing my entire time and opportunity on this product and building a capability that is meant for a global platform. And today we are operating in countries like Middle East, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Australia, India, Mexico, US. So it's not just few countries, but we are operating in multiple large markets.
Obins, I love that. And congratulations with what you've achieved thus far. That truly is amazing growth. And I love it because it tells the story of African startups that are able to scale beyond the confines of Africa. To that point, Dalumuzi, you are a very humble gentleman because your background includes being a Rhodes Scholar and having studied at Harvard. And so you clearly had the whole of the world as your playing field, and you chose to come back to Africa. Talk us through that decision. What is the allure and the promise that you believe to exist here to have made you come back from a world that's at your feet?
Great. No, thank you. You're very kind and gracious. Appreciate it. First of all, Africa is home. And it's so interesting because, when you're applying to the US for college, you have to write personal statements. And I remember I wrote my personal statements back in 2008, 2009. And that was the height of the Zimbabwe currency crisis. And what's interesting about it is that, what really gets you into an Ivy League is a bit of a sob story, right? Like I was queuing for money, queuing for cooking oil, queuing for food, But you get the admissions officer to be like, you got grit, you're resilient, you're persistent. So, just come in and have this opportunity. And that really speaks to why I came back. Because the challenges are immense on the continent, which therefore means the opportunities are also really great. And just to give a little bit of background about the specific opportunity that I'm going for through my startup Notto, is we're essentially building an alternative credit bureau. So I got to the US and just paint the picture. Every single other day, I would get in the mailbox a letter from Capital One offering me a credit card as a student. And I would remember a lot of my peers would be like, you know what, you need to get that credit card because it will help you build your credit. And by the time you're done with college, you've used that credit card, you've repaid it, you've repaid your phone contract, then you get more access to credit, you can get a car loan, you can get a mortgage eventually, etc. And one of the things that we've done in building Notto is sort of looking back at some of those experiences and saying, well, that's not the case in most of Africa, right? It's very difficult to build a credit score, near impossible. And so what does it look like to translate some of what We've seen, personally and with my team in the world about what it looks like to build credit infrastructure, what it looks like to provide access to wealth building credit, and then translate that to a very specific, African context. And the last thing I'm going to say is, for me, it was sort of a no-brainer to come back home. I'd been away for 10 years, been to Harvard, Rhodes Scholar, Oxford, the works, worked in a global corporate, and there's so much that I had to bring, so that hopefully, 10, 20 years from now, kids applying to the US have got less sob stories to write about.
Maybe some success stories as opposed to sob stories.
Exactly.
Just quickly switching gears, because we covered this perspective of investors just before this segment. But now I want to just test some of what they had said. So, Obins, what was fundraising like in Africa? Tell us about the experience.
So I would say I was very much focused on building the product, and while I was building the product so just to give you a brief about the product, which will give you a very good context. So we focused on creating a very detailed car condition report through AI-based tool. And when we were creating this, we started with insurance industry, and very soon we realized literally every transaction, just like payment gateway, every transaction in vehicle industry requires some kind of health record. Now, when you require such health record, how do you get that validation? How do you get that tamper-proof health record when?
Yeah, we can hear you,
Siri
Obins.
got activated. Hello. Sorry, my Siri got activated just for a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so when we were building this product, and when we built it for insurance space, and then very soon working with the automotive ecosystem, it created the network effect to build with every touch point in the automotive ecosystem. And when we were building, all the OEMs, maker, workshops, all of them started coming to us. And because we were solving such a big problem for the automotive ecosystem, where this problem of trusting the vehicle, which is the second most expensive asset for any human being after investing in the houses. So that's where we started getting to, we were reached out by OEMs, we were reached out by autonomous vehicle companies, by automotive value chain companies. And I think for me, and most of those players were local. So it was a gradual progression from building a product, having a product market fit, to showing what is the traction, and then automatically having very wide range of strategic investors reaching out to me. So that was my progression basically. And I would love to hear from Dalumuzi how he has progressed.
Great.
Yeah, let's do that.
Sure,
by the way, I
let's-
think that's not the second most expensive thing. It's the third most, because number 2 is getting married. But Dalumuzi, back to you.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you so much, Obins. Funny enough, you focused on cars and actually focused on home loans. And as just to give a little bit of a background, so we're an alternative credit bureau platform using bill payment data to help people build credit scores, as opposed to a retail account and a credit card, because in many cases, how well somebody pays their bills is a very good proxy for how they will repay stuff like a car loan, a home loan, etc. So that's what we're focused on. In terms of the fundraising journey, we have so far raised funds entirely from friends and family. So we've raised about $1 million from friends and family by way of a safe, etc. So it was just very interesting listening to talk about structures. And I guess we've just chosen to do it the hard way. We're trying to do something really difficult, which is to build the Equifax and FICO of Africa and emerging markets. And one of the things that we have to get, the biggest milestone is getting a license as a credit bureau, because we're setting ourselves up as a credit bureau. And you look at the regulations in South Africa, they're like, you cannot generate revenue until you're licensed. We have to do IT, set up IT systems. I've got like policies and procedures coming out of my ears on business continuity and disaster recovery, and setting up servers both on AWS and Azure, etc. So point is, there's just so much groundwork that we've had to do, which friends and family were like, what, we know you, we believe in you, go for it. And sometimes you kind of talk to VCs, they're like, okay, great, when is the license coming? And then when the licenses come, show us the traction. So it's just been a very interesting journey of being like, what, let me just build the foundations of the business to get to the point where you unlock this very big thing, which is the license, and then you essentially build the standard of credit scoring, which is sort of like the FICO for emerging markets. And in a nutshell, very interesting journey. Difficult, but building with friends and family, and then getting to a point where you've got the various proof points, and VCs can now come in.
That's fantastic, and I must say, very privileged to be able tonight to talk to businesses that are going cross-border thinking as opposed to being a business in a jurisdiction. And I love that we've got an expose, perhaps to potential investors tonight, signaling that African thinking is exponential, is cross-border, and is value-driven. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I do want to keep to the clock, so I'm going to thank you for joining us again. We know that Startup Founder Time is ultra valuable, and so we are highly appreciative of it. Thank you. And thank you for also playing fair in testing the investor perspective that we had out earlier tonight. And we wish you both the very best in your endeavor of growing your businesses. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, William. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Tim, as we transition into the last segment of tonight, you are deeply involved in the fundraising of startups, and globally so. Your portfolio spans the whole world, but there are African companies in that portfolio as well. From a funding perspective, some of the main trends that you're picking up and seeing?
Yeah, so thanks, Willem. Like, I think a lot of what's been said tonight has resonated with me, especially when it comes to African startups. I think that African startups often suffer from a lack of liquidity in the capital markets on the continent. It's starting to become more interesting at later stage. So what you're seeing is the international investors coming in, and they're investing in Series B, Series C rounds. But if you're just starting out, you're doing a seed round, a Series A round, that's still quite challenging. And we're seeing those rounds take quite a while to actually close. So I think increasing competitiveness in the market is key for founders, and it's key to getting better valuations across the market. And secondly, it'll add to liquidity because things will start to happen much faster. In San Francisco, if you want to raise a round, you can probably close your entire round in a couple of weeks. In South Africa or Africa, we advise companies to plan 4 to 6 months ahead of wanting to have cash in the bank because there is a delay. So what we really see is that there is a huge opportunity as an investor here because there are many great entrepreneurs, as we've seen tonight, and we continue to sort of show the world from Simple Capital's perspective that there are these amazing African businesses. And we, given that we sort of have a forefront position here, we are able to take advantage of that and get into the right deals at the right time. But I do think that for the market and the ecosystem to grow and expand, exponentially, and for us to see the $10 billion of investment, we need to see more investors on the continent. We need to see more competition between investors getting into deals. And I think then we'll see, some great results and many more unicorns than we see today.
We like to call them internally early corns, the one that we saw early that turned into unicorns. Tim, I'm going to ask our production team to bring some of the Simple Capital members back, and also Theron, because I I cut him off earlier, and he graciously helped us out there. Thank you again, Theron. Joining us now with Theron is Lior and Blake, both from Simple Capital as well. Theron, perhaps I could kick off with you, seeing as I abruptly ended with you the previous time around, and perhaps just ask for those same comments from you, and use that as a segue into now very excited about Africa, heard from investors as well as some of the opportunities here. How does one go about it? What excites you about Africa and perhaps even the Simple Capital structuring?
Yeah, many things. There's actually, we should reserve another hour for this conversation in and of itself. It's very, I mean, for me, it's unknown. For me, when we started talking, and the portfolio that you shared with me, and when I started digging in, doing my own diligence, I was blown away with the caliber, the thoughtfulness of the founders, the preparedness, and actually how well they've done thus far. You get very myopic also being in North America. And I think there are so many opportunities that I had problems understanding, having access to, understanding how to navigate. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty that went along with that. So these conversations are extremely helpful, and I think also exciting that, as Jim was saying before too, is you go to those places that are unknown, that have potential, that you try to get there first, you try to understand what's going on and see how the market has developed. And I see Africa as that. I also see the infrastructures there, and some of these, there was earlier signals, even let's say 5 years ago, with how people were transferring dollars between each other, how people were having to work within the structures and the restrictions that they had to make things happen. And I'm a firm believer that restriction fuels creativity, right? So through this, you can, and I mentioned this earlier as well, as I feel it's going to be easier for these companies to hit a global marketplace because they've had different restrictions that what I know really well, we've never had. So I think there's a lot of thought and a lot of processing that has gone into these startups that will really hit the market. And as also mentioned earlier as well, there are other maybe tangential markets that also need these products, that also need these services. There's a lot of countries that can use this, and it's not, maybe it's a little bit later for Africa. While I was with Silicon Valley Bank, we had a big investment time in South America. That was kind of a new thing for North America, several years ago. And how is that any different than what's happening in Africa today? I mean, I'm not saying one country is further ahead or in any different way than the other, but there have been so many amazing things that are going on, and so many amazing things that are happening. I don't see why we aren't giving enough attention to what's happening in Africa.
Amazing. So succinctly put. Let's use that immediately, and I'll pose this to the Simple Capital team. Perhaps Blake, starting with you. Theron's words. So many amazing things happening right now. How does one start, and what do you look for in and amongst this heap of amazingness? How do you pick the winners? What should we be endeavoring?
Sure, thanks, Willem. So I'll say from a Simple Capital perspective, we obviously look for scalability of technology across the continent. It was mentioned earlier on the webinar that arbitrage is key. A low cost base for African countries where the tech can scale globally and you can earn hard currency revenues. Partnerships on the ground are crucial in terms of, and that's where we find we can leverage our corporate partnerships at Simple Capital. And we always look to add value to our portfolio companies because we've obviously got boots on the ground. So, we are very active across the entire continent in terms of the different pillars of our business. So, I mean, in our retail investments, we've got exposure across some amazing Pan-African businesses. Sweep South is one of them. the largest home services platform across the continent. If you look at India, you look at the US, there's unicorns in the space. There's no player that's really captured that African market. And with expansion into Kenya, Nigeria, and a recent acquisition into Egypt, we really feel Sweeps Out is best placed. We've made other investments into companies like YeboFresh, e-commerce platform, tackling the township markets. They're in 25 township communities currently, but over the next 5 years, looking to expand their community points of presence over 20 times to over 60,000. One more pure African business that we're invested in is called Plentify, a smart energy business. And if you think, especially in South Africa, about energy crises, these guys are looking to optimize load reduction and demand management and turn home appliances into intelligent assets with their first application in water heating. We've also got a few investments that are domiciled offshore but have exposure to African countries. And, Daniel Swiggers and his team are excellent in terms of finding opportunities for us. So we've got over 50 scouts across the globe, 17 of which are actually based in Africa, across South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria. We think of it almost like the Star of Africa in terms of where most of the deal flow is, north, east, west, and south. And then we also assist many African businesses in conducting the next capital raise. So we've actually got about 7 African clients across home services, agri-tech, prop tech, and food tech, where we help them in our capital partnerships. And we also think ourselves as a conduit for international money to access quality African startups. And then, as I mentioned earlier, from a corporate side, we are partners with a listed entity that has exposure across 10 different African countries. So there's a lot of synergies and leverage that can be enhanced there.
Like, you're not talking about a small footprint. This is, let me just say, Tim and the team have been busy. Leo, none of this happens without effort and without talent. Who is the Simple Capital team?
Thanks, Willem, and good evening to the audience. So the good-looking faces that you see on the screen here are the diverse team members at Simple Capital, based out of the UK and dotted all across Southern Africa. In this team, we have people with incredible experience, having worked in some of the biggest startups and household names and corporates around the world. We also have a wide range of specialists that aren't necessarily shown here, who are on demand in fields such as tax, technology, and product, who are globally placed. And in addition to this, we also have a venture scout network, which is placed in over 30 tech hubs around the world, including key African cities like Cape Town, Lagos, Nairobi, and Cairo.
Alrighty. So all over the show, not everyone on there is good looking, but we'll leave that for an internal team meeting to decide who's who. Tim, I just want to come to a closing point in tonight and ask, for investors that are looking at Africa with the risks, the 54 countries, some of the investor sentiment that we'd seen earlier, clearly some engineering, to Jim and Aaron's point, needs to happen. You've done some of that. What does it look like in brief? And what are the types of structures that investors could look forward to should they decide to go the route of investing in Africa, perhaps through a Simple Capital?
Thanks, Willem. We have designed a special structure for most of our investors. So it's a company called Simple Capital Limited. It's a special purpose investment vehicle. It's based in the UK. We act as the entity's manager or the investment partner to the entity. And all of us are employed at the Simple Capital Partners Limited level. So we are not part of Simple Capital Limited. That is purely an investment company. Investors acquire a pref share, and the pref share gives them exposure to either a single investee company or a bundle of investee companies. So we have pioneered an interesting concept of investing in a group or in multiple companies at once, which we think are interesting and that provide some diversification to the investor. Our standard terms when you're investing with us, generally the pref shares are priced at about $1,000 per share. You pay a 5% upfront fee on the total investment. Compare this to 2 and 20, which is traditionally the way that VC funds work. Every year you pay 2% and then you pay a carried interest of 20%. We charge a once-off upfront fee of 5%. So by year 3, you're kind of making a profit. We don't have any annual fees, and our performance fee is calculated at the end, and it's only 5% compared to 20%. And it's calculated on the total returns less your fees and capital. So you basically get your fees and capital back first, and then whatever's left as a return after tax is split 5% to Simple Capital and 95% to the investor. In terms of investing with us, there are multiple ways. You can do a bank transfer. There's obviously a cost on your side, but you can also use some of the payment mechanisms that we've enabled, such as credit card, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal. Any of those work, and you can send us through your investment.
So you have been busy. I'm hearing diversified portfolio, safe haven jurisdiction, aligned interest, very reasonably priced. All exciting things, Theron, that we hope also will appeal to US investors. And to that point, for people in the audience, if you are interested, there is an upcoming African investment bundle utilizing the structure that Tim has spoken of now. And if you hover your phone or your device over this QR code, it will pop up with a registration page so that you can see when it is and who we are bringing that we will reveal in that particular webinar. So with that, then I'll ask for closing comments, perhaps centered around things like Africa, investor sentiment, types of opportunities, and perhaps a little bit of personal belief from each of our panelists here as we close out the evening. Ladies first, I will start with Leo and asking you to help us close out.
Thanks, Willem. Yeah, I think it's very valuable to hear from a broader global community just how much opportunity lies pregnant on the continent of Africa. I think with a lot of diversity and adversity comes a lot of potential. And being on the ground in South Africa, you certainly can start to sense very tangibly that things are changing and things are on the up, and we're going to catch up to the rest of the world. It's just a matter of time. So it really is a very exciting time to be a part of the beginnings of the space.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leo, and thank you for joining us this evening. Blake, from yourself?
Yeah, I suppose closing comments, I think, Willem, you always talk about is that Africa has got this prime opportunity to leapfrog. In terms of the rest of the world, maybe infrastructure has fallen behind, but in this tech-enabled world and era that we're living in, there's just this huge opportunity to leapfrog from a startup perspective. I would also say, rising tide lifts all ships. So smartphone penetration, emerging middle class, young population, and a big population is all, macro tailwinds. And then to turn an investment thesis into tangibility, I think being on the ground, having the right partners, and leveraging corporate relationships is crucial.
Super. Blake, our CIO, thank you very much for that. Theron, friend of Simple Capital, part of Simple Capital team, and CEO of Fifi, your closing comments.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of what was just said is really, really important to making all of this happen. I did not know the quality and the value of companies and the potential portfolio, and actually how easy it was to make these investments. There are so many unknowns, and in a very short amount of time, I've come up to speed. And I see this as a huge opportunity for other investors, especially here, but I'd say globally as well. I really trust and believe in what you're doing as Simple Capital as well. And I think there's a great opportunity to get into these direct investments, create a little security and trust around it, and leverage what being there to help me make better decisions. Yeah. So I really I'm excited to see how everything evolves, and I don't think it's a country you can stop, right? It's going to keep on evolving. The great portcos are going to continue coming out, and there's only upside.
Good. Really love that perspective, and thank you for that endorsement also. Much appreciated. Tim Willis, CEO, Simple Capital, perhaps some closing thoughts from you just before we let people have their dinner.
Yeah, thanks, Willem. I think it's been a great evening, and it's been really amazing to see all the thought leaders that we've had on the call tonight. I think as Simple Capital, although we headquartered in London, we pretty much all of us are somehow linked to South Africa or to Africa more broadly. And I think running projects like this are super important for us. Building the continent, building the country that a lot of us were born in. And I think it's really exciting to see the growth on the continent. So I'm really excited about what's to come. I'm excited about the continent, and I'm glad that we're able to help and do something meaningful.
Thank you very much, Tim. Nice words to end the evening on. Ladies and gentlemen, if from wherever you've joined this evening, thank you for joining us. I'll ask for the QR code to come up in our exit as I thank our panelists for their contribution tonight, sharing of their time and their wisdom. Join us for this Africa bundle that will go live by following the QR code link that's on screen now. We'll keep it up there for a second. Obviously, it will also be in the recording at the end of the evening. We thank you for joining us, and we sincerely hope that we'll see you in the Africa bundle when we unveil it down the track. To the panelists, thank you very much. Your time, your effort, your thought leadership. We wish everyone well in their endeavor and also in good health. Good night, everybody.